Welcome to Journey of the Soul. This is going to be the abridged version of Lesson 1. Lesson 1 is called Demystifying Death. This is the perspective on life and beyond. Turn to page 2 in your student book, and we will now begin. So first, we want to ask, why are we here? Why is studying death relevant? Wouldn't it be better to spend our time exploring pressing issues like finding meaning, clarity, purpose in a dark and confusing world, how to strengthen our relationships, surmount challenges and difficulties? What is so interesting about the subject of death and why? And you can think, but what attracted you to this course personally? Is there something about the topic that you're most interested in clarifying, or that drove you to the topic of death and what you want to know about it and why it's so interesting? There are many, many important issues in this course that we will address, but here are the primary objectives of this 6-part course. Number 1 is the philosophical and theological issues. Heaven and hell, reincarnation, is there a purpose to death? What happens to the soul? Number 2 is the emotional aspect, the emotional issues. Facing our own mortality can be scary. It can be a source of anxiety, as well as what to do in the wake of the loss of a loved one. How and when do we recover from the devastating blow that is the loss of a close relative or someone we loved? And number 3 is the practical issues. How do we prepare for death, my own or someone near and dear, practically and spiritually? What's the meaning behind the Jewish funerals, the mourning traditions, practices? What's their significance? And what are the best ways to memorialize departed loved ones? And what should or shouldn't I say to my grieving friend? So that's the practical issues and the practical aspect that we will discuss. So we'll address the mind and soul with the philosophy and theological aspect. We'll speak to the heart by exploring the emotional element of death and the Torah's perspective on coping with the loss of a loved one. And number 3 is that we will focus on the practical and outline the steps that we all need to take to prepare for death from a religious standpoint and the many traditional laws that follow the demise of a loved one from funeral, shiva, and beyond. Now, not everyone reacts, obviously, the same way to discussions of death and mortality. I want you to think of the feeling that this topic evokes in you. Today's lesson revolves around the feelings of our own mortality, the Jewish perspective on death. Is death to be feared, embraced, or ignored? Now, obviously, throughout life, we all experience highs and lows. We all experience physical pain, emotional pain, frustration, setbacks, illness, broken relationships, fear, loneliness, betrayal, and on and on and on. But nothing even remotely compares to death. Why? Death is final. Every other trial, tribulation, affliction, at least theoretically, has an expiration date. The day that we hope and anticipate it will have passed us by. But death is final, absolute, and irrevocable. Which is why it's so scary. That's why talking about the topic of death often makes us uncomfortable. It always reminds us of our deep-seated fear of the day we will no longer be. Death is forever. Obviously, the reason why we're so scared of death, it comes back to the fact that we have self-awareness. God granted us a blessing of self-awareness. We're so aware that we're aware of our own awareness. And, a side benefit of being so self-aware is the fact that we are aware of our own, the fact that we're temporary. Life is fickle, which is, of course, very anxiety-inducing and producing, disconcerting. It's not a comfortable thought. This is the primary factor that underlies what is known as thanatophobia, the fear of death. It's a fear that's very, very common. The following reading is from a renowned psychiatrist and author who specializes in death anxiety. Page 3, text 1, a universal fear. This is from Irvin Yalom, who is a psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University. Mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. For 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart, I am afraid of death." Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we. So do we all. Each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death, and for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment. A few decades ago, a group of social psychologists advanced a theory that is known as the terror management theory, TMT, which is essentially a theory about the effect of death on life. What's the theory? It's that our awareness of death and our efforts to cope with this awareness cause a wide variety of seemingly unrelated human activities. Many modern social psychologists agree that our perspective on the fear of death strongly can inform and strongly does inform many elements of our psyche and our behavior and our life choices. From a TMT approach, humans cope with mortality by denying our own mortality and avoiding thinking about it at all. We repress the terror, basically, and we enter like a state of denial, complete denial. For many people, COVID, provided the perfect storm of fear, anxiety, and all that comes with the fear of death, and it felt very real. And below, actually, you'll see a graph on page 4, figure 1.1, that shows us that this is a widespread fear. For many of us, it got a little worse through the pandemic, but generally speaking, this has been a fear for since the beginning of time. So this course, we now understand the significance and practical importance of this 6-week philosophical, intellectual, and emotional course. That's going to be really a practical journey that we're going to now embark on. Yes, we hope and pray that our loved ones and us should all live to ripe old ages. But now we see that the implications of the perspective we take on death extends into many areas, every area of our everyday life. So really what this course is, yes, you came thinking that it's a course about death, but really it's like an electrifying course about life and what life means. The objective of this course is to explore death only so we know how to live. So to summarize, why is learning about our death so important and relevant? Because it impacts our day-to-day, our psyche, behavior, life choices. And the implication of the perspective we take on death extends into our everyday lives, every single day. Now, what is the Jewish perspective on death? To answer this, in Jewish life and in Jewish thought, death is not considered to be the end of life, but rather the beginning of a new phase of life. So it follows then that to understand what death is, we have to re-examine our definition of life. Because if death is simply a new phase of life, then clearly we're not understanding what life is. Because according to our current definition of life, death is the end. So what is life? Who are we really? This last question in particular is incredibly important to our conversation, because if we don't know who we are or what we are, we're not capable of determining if death is our beginning, end, middle, or maybe something completely different entirely. Now, if you're, a philosophical kind of person, you might, this might be something you spend a lot of time thinking about. We're a mix of cells and chemicals and electrical impulses. But where does the self emerge from all that? Now, if you're maybe more of a practical person, have more of a practical nature, you might be spending most of your time thinking about more pragmatic matters, like, what are we going to eat for dinner? You need to fill up gas or something. But when we encounter a crisis, all of us, no matter what kind of person we are, when we encounter crisis like illness or the death of a loved one, we are forced to confront this question. At these moments, life seems so fragile and difficult to define. We suddenly feel like specks in the vastness of the universe, here for a moment, then gone. These moments force us to confront the question, who are we really, and what is life all about? Now, according to Jewish mystics, this question can't be answered through physical observation, but we need to turn to the world of the spirit for the answer. The following text from the teachings of the Holy Arizal, one of the greatest Kabbalists of all time, transcribed by his foremost student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, addresses this existential question. There's a story of the great Hasidic master of Zusha of Anipoli. They once found him pacing around his home, completely distraught, and saying again, "Vu is Zusha? Vu is Zusha? Where is Zusha?" Later, his followers, they asked him, "Hey, what did you mean when you were asking, where is Zusha? Why would a person say to himself, where am I?" So Rav Zusha responded, "One day I'm going to die. You're going to walk in, you're going to find my body here on the floor, and I will be exactly as I am right now. The same flesh, the same bones, the same countenance. But I won't be Zusha. So if my countenance, appearance, and physical substance are not Zusha, then where is Zusha?" So, we're going to turn to the world of the mystics to further understand this topic. Text 2, page 5 in the student book. The wise are aware that the human body is not a human being. When we speak of the human being, we are referring to the human's inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn into this world. So who's the real I? According to this text, we are not a particular body part, or a head, like the head or the heart, or even the sum of all the body parts. Moreover, we're also not our knowledge, our intellect, emotions, feelings, fears, or desires. The real I is the soul, which we know in Hebrew as the neshama. We're now going to play a short video meditation with Rabbi Shais Taub to illustrate and to visualize these ideas.
Hi, this is Rabbi Shais Taub. Welcome to a series of meditations for the course Journey of the Soul. The purpose of these meditations is going to be internalizing some of the deeper ideas that are a little bit difficult to grasp. And generally, we will try to do so by way of visualization, trying to picture symbols that represent some of the ideas and that we can focus on briefly so that we can begin to connect on a deeper level to these ideas. To begin with, the entire notion of life is a challenging concept because it is so intangible. We're used to relating to things, to that which we can see, to that which we can touch. And life is completely intangible. How do we begin to relate to that which is unseeable, untouchable? How do we envision, how do we see the unseeable? So if you will, I'll ask you to begin right now, however you're most comfortable doing so. Close your eyes, keep your eyes open. Envision a musical instrument, a physical object, let's say a piano, made of wood and wires, something you can look at with your physical eyes, you can touch it with your physical hands. It's a physical object. Now, the piano is merely a thing. A person comes over to the piano, the pianist sits down and begins playing a beautiful song. Now, this song stirs your soul. Try to hear it. Hear the music. Where is the song? Can you see it? Can you touch it? You can see and touch the piano. You can't see or touch the song. And now the song is over and the piano is standing there. If you'll open up the piano, will you find the song? Think now how everything in the world is matter and energy. The matter is the physical object that we see, the piano. The energy is the intangible, the song. We'll take a half a minute now to try to think of ourselves in these terms. Think of your body as the instrument, the physical object that can be seen, that can be touched. And think of the life you live as the song that is being played through the instrument. We'll take half a minute right now to see and hear the piano and the song, the body and the soul.
If you turn to page 6, figure 1.2, who am I? The real me is my soul, not my body. Now the soul, the word soul, is something we all kind of have a basic understanding of. And, like electricity. If someone says it in a conversation, yeah, we're familiar with its effects, but on a deeper level, we don't really understand. Most of us definitely don't really understand, what these entities really are. I just said that the real me of the human being is the soul. But what is the soul? Now take a minute to think of maybe an analogy that you can use to depict the body-soul relationship. But before we begin this discussion, we need to concede that number one, we are physical beings with physical minds and physical frames of reference, and we're not going to be able to fully, in all four dimensions, fully wrap our heads around this and what a soul is. Like a person who's born blind cannot, picture or understand fully the concept of colors. But we can definitely learn to the best of our abilities some things about the neshama. Now let's turn to the Torah's description of creation of the human being. The first place where we're informed about the existence of the neshama, the soul. And we'll begin to understand. And like we said, we are not our bodies, we're not our knowledge or intellect or emotions and desires, we are the soul. Now let us move on to see and begin to understand what the soul is. Text 3a, page 6. God informed the human of soil from the earth and breathed into its nostrils a neshama, soul of life. and the human being became a living being. This transpired all on the sixth day of creation. Earlier in the day, God created animals. Here is a description of when that happened. Text 3b, page 6, God said, "Let the earth bring forth living beings of differing species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth, according to their species." And so it was. And it was so. Now let me ask you a question. What is the difference between the way these two things, the human and the animal, was created? There is a great distinction in the way they were created. If you see by the human, it says first God created the human of soil, meaning first God created the hardware, soil from the earth, and then God added the software, the soul, that he imparted into the body. This is in direct contrast to the way we see how animals came to be. Animals were created with their life force already endowed. Human beings were created first as, inanimate objects that were later given life through the soul. Animals, came straight from the earth as living creatures, fully living creatures. It might seem somewhat insignificant, but this tells us something incredibly important about the human soul. The human soul does not necessarily share an existence with the body. The fates of the body and soul are not necessarily intertwined. And most importantly, for the purpose of our discussion, just as the body and soul were not a single unit at their inception, they part ways later on as well. Just to mention for a moment regarding pets, the basic explanation with pets and souls is that every creation has a soul, a divine spark. It says in Kabbalah, the soul of every creature is very different, tailored exactly to its function. Human souls and animal souls are very different, but they both have souls. It's very, very Kabbalistic and esoteric, but yes, pets do have souls, just a different kind of soul than humans have. So now we're going to move on to text 3c to discuss this idea of the body and soul being separate units. Page 7. God did what he had not done with any other creature. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does. Not only is the real I not the body, but the true I doesn't need a body. The true I is eternal. It's the source of the body's biochemistry, not a product of it. Yes, it inhabits the body for a while, but it precedes it and continues to exist well after the body's gone. To put it in different words, the body has no independent life. The soul does. The body doesn't really experience life. It just tags along. Yes, while it is, the soul is inside it. The body too, yes, is alive. But it's not intrinsically alive. And yes, at a certain juncture, the ride ends for the body. So now we have page 8 on figure 1.3. The real me is my soul, not my body. And number 2, the real me, the soul, is eternal. So too I am eternal. Now, with these 2 points in mind, we can understand, and we can begin to understand, that death is not the end of life. Rather, it's just the beginning of a new phase. Now, to continue, text 4 on page 8 will go into another profound idea about the human soul. 40 days before the conception of a child, God summons the angel in charge of the souls and tells him, "Bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such. Its appearance is such and such. This is possible because all the souls that are born into this world were created on the day the world was created and exist till the end of time." The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the Supreme King of Kings. God instructs the soul, "Please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy." But the soul protests, "Master of the universe, I am quite satisfied with the world I inhabited since the day you created me. I am holy and pure, hewn from your throne of glory. Why do you wish to cause me to enter this putrid drop?" We continue on text 5 on page 10. Another text that contributes to this idea. "The world is like a corridor before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. And a single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world." So to summarize, the theme of these two texts is not only that the soul is not a physical thing, a physical being, but it's also not interested at all in the physical world. While it's in heaven, it has no desire to come down into this world. The soul has no need for the body. And as the text we just read clearly say, the soul is more than content to lead a completely spiritual existence. In fact, it's deeply perturbed by its descent into the body. And the last of the three is, the real eternal me is relatively unaffected by birth or death. The soul will just return to living its spiritual life that it lived before birth. Its journey into this world seems somewhat incidental to the soul's, spiritual reality. Now, what you might, take from this is to think that, God forbid, Judaism isn't too keen on this world in the first place, and that maybe we shouldn't be overly bothered by the idea of death. Meaning that, heaven is what it's all about, and life doesn't really matter that much, is God forbid. And you indeed see that there are some cultures and religions that believe so to disastrous consequences. This, however, is very far from the Jewish perspective. As we'll see, in Jewish view, life in this world is paramount. Death is a complete tragedy. There's no greater mitzvah than saving a life, period. And we are told by the Torah to be exceedingly careful in safeguarding the health of the body. In fact, according to Jewish law, we'll see in text 6 in Maimonides' Code of Jewish Law, preserving life takes precedence over nearly every mitzvah. If you turn to page 12 on text 6, you'll see that it says, if a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed, because the Torah states concerning the mitzvahs, a person shall do them and live by them. One should live by them and not die because of them. Life takes precedence over mitzvahs even when a person is on their deathbed. And there's no hope for a natural recovery. Even at that point, we'll still do everything, including desecrating the Shabbos, etc., in order to lengthen the person's life even by a couple minutes, even for a few moments. So think, this means that the soul's occupation, which are mitzvahs, is less significant than the bodily life, the body's occupation, which is living a physical life. To further confuse, let's zoom out for a second and look at the complete texts from the two readings we cited earlier, text 4 and 5, and we're going to demonstrate the superiority of the afterlife. And we're first going to read God's response to the soul when it was protesting about sent to this world in text 7, which is the conclusion of text 4. This is in response, God's responding to the soul that is protesting. God hurries to reassure the descending soul, the world to which I am bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul. Now, as for the Mishnah that we mentioned earlier, the text, I believe text 5, that speaks of the superiority of even 1 hour in the world to come over the entirety of this world and all its pleasures, that statement happens to be preceded and qualified by the following one. Text 8, which immediately precedes text 5 in the original text in Ethics of Our Fathers. A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all the world to come. Now let me ask you a question. How are we going to reconcile the value Judaism places on bodily life with its belief that we've been discussing in the immortality of the soul? This all leads us to a much more complete Jewish perspective on life and death. It's a perspective that's nuanced and sophisticated. Yes, it's true that A, the soul is eternal, and B, the soul, which is a spiritual entity, is more naturally at home in the spiritual realms. At the same time, its very reason for existence is all the time it spends in this physical world and everything that it can accomplish here. In fact, not only is its time that it spends here the reason for the soul's creation, it actually is the reason for all creation. Yes, paradise might be opulent and luxurious in comparison to the corridor, quote unquote, of this world. But the only reason it exists is because it's in the service of this world and the work that we, physical beings, do down here. The idea and the whole purpose of creation is realized by and actualized through our work in this world, as we'll see in the following text, in text 9, in the Talmud, that all of creation is for what we do here in this physical world, carrying out our mission, studying Torah, and doing good deeds, bringing goodness and kindness into this world. Text 9 on page 14, God created the universe on the condition if the Jews accept the Torah. He told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they do not, I will return you to nothingness. Meaning, if we don't listen to the Torah and do what we need to do here in this world, positivity, goodness, kindness, spirituality, ethical living, then the entire world, including heaven and all the levels of paradise, revert to pre-creation non-existence. So God didn't create the universe because he desired paradise and the afterlife and heaven, but he desired human beings who live holy and ethical lives here in this physical world that is filled with anything, seemingly anything but holiness. But because God couldn't, allow us to work hard without any, reward, he created paradise to provide us with that, with the reward for the important work that we're doing here in this world. So, for an example, imagine someone who proposes to the love of his life, and they settle on a date for the wedding with great excitement, and they hire a caterer and a photographer, a videographer, a band, a limo driver, photographers, and so on, and all the different vendors, only for the last second the bride to get cold feet, and now there's no wedding. What does this guy now feel about his caterer and his musician and his photographer and the limo driver? Not only is he not excited about them anymore, he doesn't need them at all. They're just clutter. The same thing God desires a relationship with us, and that relationship is realized through our observance of the Torah and mitzvahs. Everything else God created, from the holiest angel to the most spiritual and lofty and heavenly worlds, and all the way to the worm that's, wiggling on the floor in the rainforest. It's all the supporting cast. It's all the vendors that are here to facilitate and as well as to celebrate our relationship with God. This is why in Judaism, there's nothing more valuable than life. Everything is about what happens here. This is the big leagues. This is where where it's at. Life in this world is infinitely more valuable than the afterlife. Yes, 1 hour in the world to come is more pleasurable than everything in this world, but 1 hour in this world is more important than anything the next world has to offer. Now, does this all jibe with what we learned earlier about the supremacy and the amazingness of the spiritual worlds and the soul's, hesitation and reticence to come down to this world? Yes. Yes, it does. Absolutely. As it turns out, the soul's feelings on this matter are very complex. And it has very conflicted feelings, contradictory feelings. As we're going to see in the following Mishnah, in text 10, on page 15. It says, against your will you were formed, and against your will you are born. Against your will you live, and against your will you die. Explain that to me. How is it both against our will? If you want to be here, be here. If you want to not be here, don't be here. Does the soul want to live, or does the soul not want to live? So based on what we have explained, we understand that the soul has mixed feelings. On one hand, it's scary, mixed feelings about its descent into this physical world. On one hand, it's very foreign, it's very scary. On the other hand, it's exciting, it's exhilarating. It's the moment of truth, the reason why it was created. It's the best and most important thing that can ever happen to it. So when in heaven, the soul is reluctant to leave paradise, against your will you live. But when on earth, it's reluctant to leave the place where it's making a difference. This is the big leagues. This is where it's at. Against your will you die. It's the next world, yes, is more pleasurable, but this world is more important. And that's the conflict that the soul deals with. That's why it's scared to come here, but it's also scared, it doesn't want to leave. Now, to summarize, 1 hour in this world is more important than all the next, and 1 hour in the next world is more pleasurable than all that this one can offer. This causes the soul to have very mixed feelings. When in heaven, it's reluctant to leave, and when on earth, it's reluctant to leave the place where it's making a difference. Now, as we mentioned earlier, one of the, basically the universal way for contending with the fear of death is trying to impact this world in a way that even after someone's gone, their legacy and memory continue to live on. Now, the Jewish approach is different. In the Jewish way of thinking, we don't remain alive artificially or metaphorically in the minds of hearts of others. But we really essentially remain alive. Because death is not the end. The soul keeps living. And yet, like we discussed earlier, we value life more than anything. There's a story that vividly demonstrates the idea of not fearing death because life does not end. This is about Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. He was the 6th Rebbe and leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement. He was incarcerated many times by the Soviet authorities. His crime, was defying the communist regime, encouraging Jews to remain true to their traditions. This was very treasonous, counter-revolutionary activities. Here's one of the accounts of his interrogations that were done at the notorious GPU, which was, the KGB, the Russian secret police. Text 11 on page 16. I arrived for the interrogation at the offices of the Soviet GPU. However, in keeping with my principles, I was not very cooperative. One of the interrogators raised a revolver that sat on the desk before him. He looked me in the eye and mockingly said, "This small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths. Under its spell, even mutes have become talkative. I responded, you're quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on faint-hearted non-believers, those with one world and multiple gods. We, on the other hand, have one God and two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever. Of course, the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, wanted to live and continue his mission in this world. But at the same time, death didn't seem so frightening. He was able to face it with complete serenity. The Jewish perspective doesn't allow for thanatophobia, for fear of death. It allows us to fully and truly live and fully and truly appreciate the value of life, but without a deep fear of death. The appreciation for life, on the one hand, but the lack of fear on the other, we can see in the following text, in text 12, which is talking about the passing of the great Rabbi Judah Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was the editor of the Mishnah. Text 12 on page 17. When Rabbi Judah the Prince fell ill and lay on his deathbed, Rabbi Chia entered and found him weeping. My master, explained to Rabbi Chia, why do you weep? Was it not taught if one dies smiling, it's a good sign for him, while weeping is a bad sign for him? Rabbi Judah replied, I weep because of my inability to study the Torah and observe the commandments after death. Now, generally speaking, someone crying before they die is understandable. Yet Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Judah's student, was very surprised. Why do you weep? He said. You should know, you're a holy man. You should know the Jewish perspective that life doesn't end at death. There's nothing to cry about. Plus, you're going to get rewarded in paradise. It's going to be beautiful. But Rabbi Judah responded, you're right. I'm not crying for fear of death. I am crying because I will no longer be able to perform mitzvahs and study the Torah in this world. He didn't fear the hereafter. It wasn't fear or dread that was causing him to weep. But he also wasn't looking forward to this new chapter. He recognized that his mission in this world was complete, and he was heading to his reward. But he was going to miss, being where the action is. This is the big leagues down here in this world. So to summarize, the Jewish perspective precludes thanatophobia because, yes, although we very much want to live, death doesn't frighten us. This allows us to fully and truly live and fully and truly appreciate the value of life without fear of death. Now, there's a famous Talmudic passage, text 13, that's very interesting. Page 18, it says, after their demise, tzaddikim, righteous people, are referred to as being alive. Let me ask you a question. What does it mean alive? If you're going to tell me it's because they have a soul and souls live on, why is it telling us specifically righteous people? We all have souls. From the most righteous to the most wicked. We all have a soul that lives forever. Why specifically is the Talmud saying a tzaddik, a righteous individual, is considered alive even after their demise? Now you can say it's interpreted like saying, they're alive in our hearts. We can say they're alive in as much as he or she is remembered and missed, and their legacy and their work continues, and they have influence on people, which is certainly true with regard to a tzaddik, maybe even more than an average person. But there's something much deeper going on here. Like we said before, every person has a body and a soul. The body eventually fades and returns to dust, but the immortal soul lives on for eternity. But what about all the things with which a person is identified? Their feelings, thoughts, behaviors, dreams, aspirations. Are these part of the eternal soul that lives forever? Or are these part of the mortal body that dies? Here too we have to also make a distinction. The physical and selfish element dies, but the spiritual and transcendent causes in a person's life live forever. The part of a person that's concerned with earthly and bodily needs dies with the body. It follows then that for a person who prioritizes the desires and aspirations of the body, money, physical luxuries, pleasures, honor, fame, the physical demise brings life to a crashing halt. This person's entire life focus is gone forever. On the other hand, the part or parts of a person that are identified with the eternal soul, whose focus is transcendence, spirituality, selflessness, mission, relationship with God, does not die. A non-materialistic person merely moves on to a different dimension, where they no longer are held down by physical needs, distractions, constraints. Is free to continue their spiritual pursuits. Everything that this person lived for continues living. Almost nothing changes. Their values and aspirations and priorities continue, maybe even in a greater measure, in the hereafter. Now you understand why it says tzaddikim, righteous individuals, don't die. Because like we're going to explain in text 14, tzaddikim, righteous people, have a fully spiritual, meaning eternal and immortal life while here in this world. So there's nothing to die. There's nothing left to die. Everything about them is eternal. If you look at text 14, this is from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who authored the Tanya, a great Kabbalistic and Hasidic master, page 19. The life of the tzaddik, a righteous person, is not corporeal but spiritual, consisting of faith, reverence, and love of God. This reality is reflected in the following passages. Of faith it is stated, the tzaddik lives by his faith. Of reverence it is stated, reverence of God produces life. Of love it is stated, he who pursues charity and kindness will find life. And kindness is rooted in love. We'll now watch a short video to help us illustrate these ideas.
Why wait to celebrate? Bright lights in the city streets.
Eighth Day is a popular Hasidic rock band.
Why wait to celebrate?
One of their hits was inspired by a powerful episode in the life of the second leader of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Dovber of Mezerich.
A student goes to visit a sage, and the sage has nothing in his house. And he says, "Where's your couches? Where's your chandelier?" And he says back to the student, "Where's all your stuff? You just have a suitcase." And the student responds, "But I'm just passing through." And that's when the sage says, "Aha, I'm just like you. I'm also just passing through."
To his student's assertion, Rabbi Dovber responded with a transformative insight.
That's when he said, I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me.
This world is temporary.
Where people spend most of their life collecting stuff. And the sage tells them, I'm actually just like you. I also collect stuff. It's just not that type of stuff. Not leather couches and chandeliers. I collect treasures of another kind.
You know, he stays focused on that higher goal.
Rabbi Dovber taught his students that this world's glitter is a distraction that expires when the journey of corporeality chugs to an abrupt end. Better to invest in treasures of a kind that will benefit the soul in its eternal destination.
I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. And my heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. A palace for you and me.
You know, we're all looking for something real, something eternal. And the good news is it's available. When we live and identify with real and eternal values, we become real and eternal. So we got to reframe our definition of life. It's not just, what happens between birth and death. But it's the part of a person that's immortal, eternal. It never was born, it never dies. It's the soul. The soul that is what defines what life is life, and never dies. People can live a life of death even when they're alive, if they make choices that are not in sync with the real life source, with the soul. And people can also be alive well after death, because everything their soul accomplishes while being in a body continues to live on. And that's what it means, the famous verse where God says, choose life. What kind of choice is that? God says, I put before you life and death. God really needs to tell us to choose life? Of course we're going to choose life. There's a deeper message there. And it involves the choices that we make in life. If you look in text 15 on page 20, it says, behold, I have set before you today life and goodness, death and evil. Choose life. The term life here in this verse does not refer to corporeal life, nor does death refer to the result of the soul's departure, for which simpleton needs to be instructed to choose to live. Rather, each creation, while alive and fully existent, contains both life and death. The physicality of the object is intrinsically lifeless. It's in a constant state of decline and deterioration. We observe this decline in every physical object, as well as in ourselves. Our physical capabilities and powers weaken with time. By contrast, the spiritual and divine within each thing is alive, eternal, and not subject to destruction or deterioration, God forbid. In every aspect of our lives, there's always a choice of life and death. Every meaningful choice boils down to life and death. Mortality and immortality. When we sit down for a meal, is it simply going to be for pleasure, or is it going to be the intention to be healthy, to serve God, to fulfill our mission, to keep powering, goodness and kindness and changing the world to a better place? When we go to work, is it simply to make money, to enjoy our life, or is our intention to provide for our family, to have money to do good deeds, do good things with it, to help others, charity? If you remember, earlier we said in a Mishnah that we spoke about how the world is compared to a corridor and the next world is the palace. Now, based on our new understanding of life and death, we're now ready for a entirely new interpretation of that statement. The Rebbe explains that the Mishnah is not only telling us about this world, about how special the world to come is, but on a deeper level, it's telling us about our priorities in this world. Even while we're in this corridor, the world, we should be prioritizing such things that belong to the palatial world of eternity, spiritual things. So the goal is that while living here, we should already be living in a spiritual life like in the palace. And if we do that, if you're already living in the palace when you're in the corridor, nothing changes when you move from the corridor to the palace, because in your state of mind, you're already experiencing the palace. And if we return to the story we mentioned earlier about the sixth Chabad Rebbe in Russian interrogation. It's much deeper than just the Rebbe saying that I believe in the afterlife. And I believe even if you kill me and terminate my current state of existence, my soul will proceed to another existence and it will receive its reward in paradise. The deeper meaning there is he's saying I'm already in the afterlife. Yes, I've come into this world with a mission and a purpose. But on a deeper level, I transcend this world entirely, even when I'm here. It's not that if you terminate my life here, I have something else in store for me, and that I'm going to go to paradise and so on. It's that my earthly life here is incidental to my soul. The real me is not just cells with an electric current, but it's something that you can't in any way touch. Life is not before or after death. It exists before, it exists after, it exists during the physical life of the body. It is completely beyond death. Real life. Now, we mentioned in the beginning of the lesson, we spoke about the real deep-seated fear of death. That's really, part and parcel of the human condition. And now we're going to come to see, and we've come to see, how if you adopt the Jewish and spiritual perspective of life and death, we can begin to calm this fear down a little bit. If death scares you, and if death scares us because we naturally perceive it as the end, we should contemplate the eternality of the soul that each and every one of us have within us. Moreover, if the end frightens us, we have to do fewer things that end and more things that are eternal. And that way we will ensure that our connection to life continues, and thus we achieve a sense of immortality. Now, it's important to understand that it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's not that either we live a spiritual, immortal, living life, and we're able to steer, death in the eye, or that we're living some kind of, dead, mortal life that we're terrified that life's going to come to some kind of crashing halt. It's a spectrum. And it's where are we currently on the mortality spectrum? And even more important, which direction on the spectrum are we moving towards? The more soul, the more alive. The more immortal, and the less fear. Meaning life is constant, but the question is, are we plugged in to life? Exercise 1.2 on page 21. Number 1, record one point from today's lesson that resonates with you personally. Number 2, identify an adjustment that you can introduce to your life for the sake of living in a manner that is more alive and consistent with your immortal soul. Next week, we will discuss the soul's departure from the body, the aftermath, the soul, all from the soul's perspective, the significance of the moment of passing, burial preparations, burial, grave visitation, and we will answer the question, once a soul ascends on high, what's the nature of the soul's connection with the loved ones that are still down here? Now we will watch
Lesson 1.
key points.
Demystifying death. 1. The awareness of our mortality and the resulting natural fear of death influence many elements of our psyche, behavior, and life choices. Our perspective on death influences multiple areas of our lives. 2. The neshama, human soul, the true essence of the human being, is eternal. It precedes the body and continues to exist after the body is gone. While still in heaven, it does not desire to descend into a body. And when the time of death arrives, it resumes its native spiritual state. 3. The fact that the briefest spiritual experience of the next world is more pleasurable than all of this world does not diminish the reality that even a brief stay in this world is more important than all of the next. Therefore, Jewish law gives precedence to preserving life over nearly every mitzvah. 4. This perspective allows us to appreciate and value life without fear of death. 5. While our corporeal needs and endeavors die with the body, our soul-focused aspirations and actions live on eternally. Thus, when we live and identify with eternal values, our current life continues even after the body's demise.